All right. Hey guys, how's it going? Sorry, it's just been a little while. I'm just setting this up again. There we go. So, how's it going, everyone? My name's Arden, and today we're talking about The Suicide Squad. So, this movie's been out for a little bit and has even been available in theaters in my area, which is nice and refreshing. But the stream got delayed for a couple of reasons, so I apologize for that, and I assume you guys have been waiting for my opinion on this, though, so I wanted to get the review out. Because, yeah, I'm seeing on the posters it's saying like August 6th, and we're deep into August at this point, but it took a while for me to be able to see this movie, let alone kind of get around to the point where I could review it. But here we are. I can't stay forever for this review, unfortunately, so I'm going to try and stay a little focused this time. But, K5, thanks for joining us. I also don't have a ton to say, so I assume most of that will just be devoted to chat and talking about the movie a little bit, because overall, I really enjoyed it from start to finish. It was exactly what a Suicide Squad movie would be, kind of what I expected from James Gunn, too, which is both good and bad. Like, it's good in that it had great music, had solid editing. Oh, I see what's wrong here. I'm going to do one quick thing. You. I just wanted to move it over a bit. Oh, that's why. There we go. That looks a bit better. Oh, and that thing's over there. I'm going to close that just because the AC is in there and it makes noise. K5 says, did you get a mask when you saw the movie? I didn't, but that would have been cool. That might be a US thing or something like that. It happens all the time when you're living in Canada. We don't benefit from certain things, but it's also been a while, so I wasn't there in the early times to maybe get a mask. But regardless, yeah, it was a really fun movie. There's a lot more attention to detail when it comes to how the characters are written. The editing and the action is 100 times better than anything else out of the DCEU. It doesn't go traditional paths in terms of superhero movie plots. So it doesn't feel like the same sort of predictable storytelling, if that makes sense. There is elements of traditional superhero movies throughout all of it, but it is its own unique thing, even kind of distinct from the Guardians of the Galaxy, but kind of what Suicide Squad, the first movie, had been going for. It just does everything better. And to me, it's just easily the best movie in the DCEU now, because up until now, really competing for it was the first Wonder Woman movie as far as I was concerned, and even that was just okay. It was nice that there was a female superhero movie, but it feels like our standard should be a little bit higher than that, because otherwise that was a very kind of paint-by-number superhero movie. And then you get something like this that is vibrant and full of life, good acting. It kind of continues the story of Suicide Squad, but in a way that it's clearly transitioning towards James Gunn's own iteration of the team. You look at something like King Shark, and that character, the humor around him is better handled, and he's just more of a fun presence as the big brute. And that was the plan for the first Suicide Squad movie, but DC or Warner Brothers or whoever kind of cheaped out on it and opted for Killer Croc instead, because they could do that through makeup instead of CGI. So the Suicide Squad just kind of is what the first movie should have been. It's bloodier and far more violent, which is appreciated because that's what this kind of team calls for, and so it doesn't feel watered down. We get people whose heads are explicitly blown off in this movie, and just all these things that were quietly pulled out of the first movie or just held back on. And there's stakes, so I'm thinking of how in the first movie there's a helicopter crash and everyone survives it, whereas in this movie there's just death everywhere. There's a ton of it early on, which I wasn't so surprised about, but there's pretty consistent character deaths throughout the movie that make it feel like Task Force X as I know them from the comics. And it even gets not overly political, but it has the same political overtones of the early Suicide Squad comics, which I really appreciate. And I kind of like how it does its politics because it's all kind of clearly laid out there. Like, this is all about American imperialism, even if it takes place in a fictional country. And it's kind of telling the story of how much of that sort of policy in the latter half of the 20th century was a disaster in countries like this fictional one. But that's like, that stuff's all kind of in the background because just like the comics, the original Suicide Squad comics, the political side of it and angles were always just kind of overtones. And the actual thesis of the movie is just to kind of have fun and be goofy and violent and sort of feature weird characters throughout DC history. It's kind of interesting. K5 says, glad the movie did not revolve around Harley, and I love Bloodsport. Well, I'm glad you say both those things, because those are two things I was about to talk about. So let's start with the first point. I am also glad that Harley didn't dominate the movie, but she had her own story arc. She kind of nicely folded into the end of the story and the final climax where everyone sort of comes together and felt like she fit very neatly. But also, and most significantly, Harley Quinn is so good in this movie. I loved it, and was like, there's a lot of bittersweet elements to this movie because I'm watching this and thinking, man, we have had Suicide Squad, Birds of Prey, and now this, all featuring Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn, and it finally took this movie to realize her character because Robbie's always been great as Harley Quinn, but these movies keep letting that down, I feel, and this movie knocked it out of the park with her. I thought she was so great. I love her little romantic montage followed by her killing said romantic interest. I feel a little bad about giving that away, but it's only a small part of the movie, really, and she has all these other little narrative arcs throughout it, and kind of is a big part of the ending, but it isn't just her. It's a team story, and Ratcatcher II is kind of the real hero in all of this, and I loved her as well. Gunn truly nailed the characters in this story, and Harley Quinn is a big part of it. That's why I say, like, oh, it's easily the best DCEU, but it does stuff like that. Rick Flag is great, and he was a problem in the thing, like the last movie, and I thought he was really well done in this story. And then we have characters like, oh gosh, well, Starro I thought was well done, and even Peter Capaldi as the Thinker, but oh shoot, I was going to talk about, the one thing that I was a little resentful over was Captain Boomerang. Now, I wasn't actually a huge fan of Jai Courtney playing this character or how he was depicted in the first Suicide Squad, so I don't really begrudge James Gunn for killing him off pretty early on, and I guess this is going to be a spoilery review, but the movie's been out for almost a month now, so I am kind of leaning more into that as I'm talking, and I think about that, and so, like, we have him being killed off, and I'm okay with that in this story because, like I said, it makes more sense for Suicide Squad to be full of casualties, and it was almost a funny little nod that they brought this actor back who's a pretty big name just to, like, kill him off in the opening kind of thing, which I adored, and thought that was fun, but I kind of wish that... So, in the comics, Captain Boomerang is almost the mascot of Suicide Squad. He's one of the few characters that consistently survives across all iterations of the team and just keeps coming back and getting stuck on here. And I kind of like that because he's not very powerful. His ability, like his boomerang thing, is kind of stupid, but it works, especially when you have a dude in a campy blue suit, which is how James Gunn would have approached this character if this wasn't a sequel to the first Suicide Squad movie. So because of that, Captain Boomerang is a little bit frustrating in how the DCEU as a larger narrative handled him. But I kind of blame, like, Warner Brothers and David Ayer for that, less so James Gunn and how he kind of handled it. If anything, I kind of like how he handled it. There's a ton of characters we don't see on Task Force X, which kind of implies they either got out or like just weren't involved in this mission or are dead. And so instead we just focus on like a few characters returning and that sort of thing. And then K5 was also talking about Bloodsport, who I really like. What I also kind of found interesting about Bloodsport is he was kind of going to just be Will Smith, either returning or recast, and you can kind of see that in the narrative. I actually think it would have been really interesting for Will Smith to have come back to this role and gotten Bloodspot's thing, but don't get me wrong, Idris Elba was awesome, Bloodsport was awesome, and I really don't resent him, but he very much is just, oh, here's our new version of Deadshot, which is fine, but you know, and almost it gets into the whole like, okay, well maybe Will Smith's character kind of got a happy ending or something like that, and then we're moving on to Bloodsport, and that's okay. I'm cool with that. Whodunit says Starro's last line, that hurt. I agree. I felt for him in that moment, and kind of appreciated that story bit. Starro was never really a villain per se. He always just, like, at least as he was introduced to us in this movie, he always just kind of like existed as he was and kind of was content to have been left alone in the stars. So there's an element of tragedy around a villain that ostensibly is just a big goofy starfish. And you can kind of argue the real main villain in a lot of ways is Peter Capaldi, who I also really liked and thought was funny and kind of fit that role in terms of like the as that character and what sort of antagonism he represented. But then you could also argue the real antagonist of this story was Amanda Waller. And I really felt frustrated with that character in exactly the right way. Because Amanda Waller is supposed to be this frustrating character who, you know, kind of wants to do the right thing, but is mired in American politics, ruthless, and you're kind of supposed to be standing with the superheroes, or in this case, the Task Force X, when they stand up to Amanda Waller. And I thought James Gunn really achieved that. And Viola Davis, again, she was always a great Amanda Waller, but now we have a good movie and a good script to back her up. So characters like her, Amanda Waller, that is, and Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn work a lot better. Tevia, thanks for joining us. K5 was saying, I wonder who declined to give Margot Robbie the foot fetish scene. You think it was a nod to Tarantino? Or who decided to give Margot? I don't know. I think it might have just been a little joke. Oh, wait. Or do you mean the escape scene? Either way, I didn't really think it was like that. I thought there was a joke about it. Bad Mr. Box says, wasn't this a full-blown reboot? That's how it was sold as. I mean, if you watch the movie, it very much is. We, like, even though we have we have 4 characters returning, one of them is not a big part of this movie, and I kind of gave away that we're killing him off really early on. 3 are, though, and it does feel like a sequel to Suicide Squad, but K5 puts it really well in chat. They treat it like a book that changed writers, which is exactly right. So instead of Suicide Squad 2, it's The Suicide Squad. It's a James Gunn film, and it's really heavily associated with him, rightfully so, because it just, and we'll get into this in a minute, but it is a much better movie than a lot of other DCEU projects. But it also is bringing the characters back. It hasn't forgotten everything that happened. And honestly, it left me kind of rooting for the DCEU. Because, yeah, we have stuff, and you know, I don't know who ultimately was responsible for Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, Suicide Squad. Jesus, this is so long. Justice League, the theatrical version, and Wonder Woman 1984. But those directors, and this doesn't include Zack Snyder's cut of Justice League, by the way, which is also good looking and filmed better, and like this movie, where it has scenes that are memorable and have this cinematic quality to them that so much of the rest of the DCEU is lacking. So yeah, like, it really, but like, and if you watch the movie, yeah, it is a sequel, but it really does transition you from the original Suicide Squad to the new one. And there's elements of the film and storytelling that really make it feel like this is a new iteration of the team. This is a new direction for them. And it is so, so much better. People might disagree with that. There are those like diehard Snyder fans that are like trying to fight for the Ayer cut and restoring Snyder. But they, you know, and it is subjective, I guess. But you look at this, you look at the wider reception of this among critics and people who, I don't know, studied movies for a living and stuff, and even someone like me who's edited enough to like notice these things and put two and two together about what cinematography is. And something like The Suicide Squad just scores better on all counts, from acting to directing, the writing, and what I really can't stress enough is the action is better in this movie. Because people are always like, "Oh, these are just dumb comic book movies. Like, why are you judging the writing and stuff like that?" But it's like, but even the most basic level, like, I love the action in this movie. I think it's so much better handled. There's so many more memorable bits to it. It's fun and fluid and easier to follow than anything else out of the DCEU, especially the stuff that Warner Bros. Put in theaters. So again, we're not really talking about the Snyder Cut, because Snyder also did good on action. And that's where I say I don't know who's responsible for earlier DCEU stuff. But when we have much more creative control in the hands of someone like James Gunn and Zack Snyder, who I think it's fair to say know what they're doing, the effect seems to be a lot more positive. When we're thrusting in people who I guess don't, like Patty Jenkins, who fought for 2 openings to Wonder Woman 1984, but that is really only one of the hundreds of problems with Wonder Woman 1984. It doesn't work as well. So you have to find people who have this experience and the ability to kind of look at this with the right eye. Patty Jenkins actually had less control in the first Wonder Woman movie. So you need that right look at it. And James Gunn is the right thing to do for a movie. But if you want a cinematic universe, what they really need is a Kevin Feige to sit around and be able to delegate these decisions and identify problems in the movie and where to step in and where the movie's succeeding. James Gunn doesn't need editorial control, but Patty Jenkins apparently does. So it's kind of about finding that blend. You look at Loki, the TV show, and Kate Herron, the creator behind that, doesn't need any creative direction, I don't think. She's kind of proven herself at this point. So it really just depends on who that person is my opinion. Whodunit says it feels more contained. Not every movie has to be about an event that will end the world. I like that too. It's all about this country, but I felt the stakes were very real. They make it clear Starro is killing people. So I would argue the stakes felt more present, and so the danger felt more real than any other DCEU movie, to be honest. I loved it. I like that what Whodunit is saying too, and I also love that it is a self-contained story too. I would be very open to James Gunn coming back to DC after he does Guardians 3 to do a trilogy of these Suicide Squad movies. I don't know if that's the case, but then when we have stuff like John Cena as Peacemaker, who's getting his own HBO show, which was kind of nicely set up in this movie, I'm all for it. Because in that context, it's like, well, we are getting something more from this franchise, and it leaves me hopeful that the right decisions are being made at Warner Brothers going forward, maybe, and we can kind of start pushing in that more positive direction, getting us kind of more aligned with something like the MCU. And like I said, this movie left me really rooting for the DCEU and hoping that they can pull something together, because meanwhile the MCU is accelerating. They really are. Their movies are coming out again. They've got all these plans. There's so many Disney Plus projects in the work. They're getting bigger than ever. And the DCEU is struggling to catch up to what the MCU was in phase 1. But this is a huge step forward. This is getting them at least to catch up to phase 2 of Marvel, and they can start accelerating a bit. Bad Mr. Boggs says something I completely agree with. He goes, I'm kind of annoyed about this movie because it delayed Guardians 3, and he says, LOL. That's all on Disney for being dumbass idiots, though. LOL. Yeah, I agree. That's on Disney for firing James Gunn temporarily. The only positive in all this is that there's going to be, I think next year, a Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special to kind of tide us over, which sounds really fun, and James Gunn is doing that too. So it's not at least there's like a silver lining to it all. And like the other side of it too is this movie wouldn't exist if Disney hadn't, like idiots, done that. So we benefited as an audience. And I think real comic fans, the ones that don't care about petty politics between Marvel and DC, which is like 90% of us, love that. And it's so great to have a product like this, especially given that the last comic book movie we reviewed was an MCU one, and it was Black Widow, and it was pretty dull. So this was very refreshing. It leaves me super excited for like what comes next, and hopeful that they can kind of step in the right direction, because our last few reviews of stuff from DCEU, like the Snyder Cut and such, have been positive. And that's nice. Like, I never wanted to hate these DC stuff, so it's really nice to be kind of slowly moving in the right direction, even if Wonder Woman 1984 was a huge disappointment. So it's not all rosy from here. And meanwhile, like the MCU, yeah, maybe Black Widow was dull, but I'm very excited for Shang-Chi, which is coming out soon, and hopefully I'll have a much faster movie review turnaround on that, and you guys will get my thoughts on it. K5 says, do you think the quote Maltese is real? Oh, sorry. K5 says, do you think people will think the quote Maltese is real after seeing this movie? I don't know. There's so much in this movie that's just like going by a mile a minute. I don't know if it'll have that lasting kind of impression on an individual line. What I think, if this movie is going to have a real world effect on this, it'll be people adopting more pet rats. It's pretty cool. I like rats. My partner has a pet rat, and he's the cutest little guy in the world. And she loved this movie for that reason. I was just so blown away by like Ratcatcher II and how well that was handled. It was cool that Taika Waititi, or however you say his name, the director of Thor Ragnarok and Love and Thunder, was Ratcatcher 1. And I thought he was so great in the movie. And then they kind of brought it all back to Ratcatcher and his relationship with Ratcatcher 2 at the end of the movie in a way that was beautiful, that thematically resonated with the entire thesis statement of the movie, which is like even the like individual petty look down on creatures like rats or Task Force X have value. And that's what this movie was about, and it was brilliant and beautiful because of it. I loved that so much. Rin says, my opinion is that it can be treated as two and a reboot at the same time. I agree. It depends on the viewer. Again, I agree. Like, if someone hasn't seen a Suicide Squad, the first Suicide Squad movie, it's not necessary to enjoy this movie. But then Rin points out, because of the closeness with Harley and Flag and Boomerang, it feels like they already know each other. Well, exactly that, but also they're the same actors, and even the same kind of setting and setup of Task Force X, and Belle Rev kind of looks similar. They even kind of make a point of that early on to kind of show it's like a similar thing. It really feels like this is a sequel, but if you haven't seen Suicide Squad, it's completely unnecessary. And I would almost recommend don't start people on that. If you want to introduce someone to the Suicide Squad to get them excited about that and the comics and stuff, this is the way to go. For sure. And it's not to say the movie's perfect. I did want to kind of briefly touch on like some mild criticisms I had. I mentioned how I was a little frustrated with stuff like Boomerang, or even what Bad Mr. Box was saying about it delaying Guardians 3. But I think those are things outside of James Gunn's control. Other things, like, the movie doesn't feel too jokey, but it does sometimes play moments for laugh. I'd rather them take a little seriously or explore a little more instead of just being a gag, if that makes sense. And I'm thinking of stuff like Waller's little minions that are working with her in the control center. They have a little bit of a story arc, but it just kind of felt like it needed a little more, because I didn't really find those characters that funny or that so there's little problems. I don't want to pretend that this movie's perfect, but everything else I've said is true. Like, there's so much of this movie that works that those problems didn't really bother me that much, and it looks great. The other thing is, it feels like a movie, and it feels like you're sitting through an experience. There's an emotional arc to it, but also like it feels as if it's a journey. so many of these comic book movies just feel like, so Black Widow, for example, kind of really feels contained and simple compared to the Suicide Squad, which is a more like elaborate experience where it's like, okay, we got to go to the island, we got all the setup going to the island, and then we got to like have the team get to know each other a little bit, and there's a good amount of time spent on that. Then we get into like the city, and they have to start trying to get into this research facility, and then there's Harley Quinn's story, which is kind of the B plot of all of this, as well as the whole big ending arc, which isn't just some big fight scene. It's kind of that. Like, if you've seen the trailers, you know it's going to be Starro doing a big fight, but there's huge elements to it, especially stuff leading up to that. The whole process of Starro getting broken out is a huge thing that has a major effect on the plot arc of various characters. Okay, so I'm caught up in chat. We've kind of avoided getting too spoilery and stuff, and I do have somewhere to be a little later today, so I think we're going to call it there. But yeah, really, really positive reception and recommendation from me. If you've been turned off by DC so far, try not like, and their DCEU stuff, try not to let any of that get in the way of enjoying this movie, because it's a good movie, and I would totally recommend it. It had me and my girlfriend laughing, and that's the other cool thing about it too. One more thing I'll say that I was thinking about while we were watching it. I went into this movie like having read a ton of Suicide Squad comics, having seen the first movie, and all the other DCEU stuff. My girlfriend went in having maybe seen the first Suicide Squad. No, she hadn't. But like a couple of DCEU stuff, but not the first Suicide Squad. Never read any of those comics. Just read some comics and stuff, but none of the Suicide Squad things. And I had to explain to her like what the team was and about before we went in, like just on a basic level. I probably didn't even need to do that, but she loved it too. So it was a good testing ground for like someone with a high level experience with comics in this team and someone with no, and we both liked it. Whodunit says, before you leave, favorite moment? That's a good question, and I think it was honestly the beginning. We are introduced to, I think it's Michael Rooker character's name, but basically Yondu from Guardians of the Galaxy, who's a friend of James Gunn, brought him on, and you've seen him in the art that I have like flashing by here and there as Savant, I believe his name is. And he gets recruited into this team, and there's a whole little montage of him going through the rigmarole for those like that don't know, like I was saying, and kind of introduces us to the team. And then it goes into this beachhead moment with all this crazy action. We get a taste of Weasel, who's played by James Gunn brother Sean Gunn, who also has a meaningful role in Guardians Volume 2. And Weasel was so fun. And what unfolds on that beach, that's all I need to say for people who have said the movie, is by far my favorite moment, because it showed me, one, this movie was going to be funny. Two, I was right to assume this was like going to be a James Gunn product, which meant it had all these earmarks of quality to it. And three, that it wasn't holding back on the gore in any way. And I was sold. And everything after that just kind of reinforced my positive first opinion of the movie. So that's rare. Very, very rarely across any movie, even some of my favorite movies ever and stuff, would my answer be the first part is my favorite. But I think that's the case. A close runner-up, though, and there's a few solid moments that are really close, like in terms of rank, would be Harley Quinn immediately after the love montage, when she sort of turns on that one guy and shoots him in the back. That was so good. I said that a little earlier in this stream. I hate to ruin that surprise for anyone, but yeah, that was so great. Shin Venom says, I have to head back to class later. Well, then that's probably a good time for me to say goodbye. But yeah, thanks for checking out the stream, everyone. And hopefully, depending on how I feel, I have a dentist appointment tomorrow morning, so we'll see. But assuming I feel okay after that, I am going to do another stream that would be really fun. So keep an eye out for that. If you don't see anything by like 1 p.m., I'm not feeling well, and it'll have to wait till like Saturday or something. But I got a really cool stream planned after this, so stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you next time here on Comic Island.